Welcome to Shameless Leadership. I'm your host, Sarah Dean. This show is for women leaders who are committed to advancing both their own leadership and the leadership of those around them. In each episode, I offer practical strategies and inspiring stories to help you become a more confident, compassionate, and curious leader. The truth is, you were born to lead. So let's start now, together. Hello, Shameless Leaders. Today we have a fun episode. I have to say, this episode happened because of friend of the show and three-time guest of the show, Elena Joy Thurston, mentioned to me, hey, I should introduce you to my friend Themba. And whenever Elena says this, I'm like, yes, send me this person. I need to know them because Elena only knows the most incredible people. So Elena connected Themba and I via email. We had a chat. I was like, yes, please come on the show. Do me the honor. And he said yes. And so here we go. A male on Shameless Leadership, not a super common experience. So I'm pretty picky about male voices on the show. And Themba was just an exceptional guest. You're going to love this interview. You're going to learn from him. And it's always really helpful to get just different people's perspective, whether it's across race or gender or ability or anything else that's just different than our own perspective. So you're going to love this conversation. So Themba Dayton is a 30-year insurance professional in the employment benefits industry living in the Pacific Northwest. In an industry that is known for being overwhelmingly male, Themba has been part of and had the honor of leading extremely diverse and dynamic teams that have been innovative and successful in their roles. Teams at their best are varied, have full engagement, and the group is committed to the success of the whole group more so than the success of any one individual. In his current role, Themba looks for opportunities to ensure that all voices are allowed to be heard, to allow for more robust discussions, and to pave the way for more meaningful outcomes. So listen in to hear Themba share how he has decided to really intentionally leverage diversity to build effective and successful teams over the course of his career, his secret in helping each member of the team feel seen, heard, held, and valued, how he is sensitive to his industry being male, pale, and stale, which I had not heard before, but I love it, and how he as a Black man leads with this sensitivity in mind, how he looks for opportunities to amplify women's voices, and then how highlighting someone else not only amplifies that person's voice, but it also helps us shine brighter as strong leaders. This conversation was fantastic. I'm so grateful to have a male on the show, a Black male on the show, someone from the insurance industry, just lots of crossover in terms of layers of identity that haven't been represented here yet. So with all that said, please join me in welcoming Themba Dayton to Shameless Leadership. Themba, welcome to Shameless Leadership. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
We have to give a little shout out to Elena Joy Thurston, who connected us. And we both had this moment of like, anyone Elena introduces, we always say yes to. So we love Elena and we're so grateful that she connected us. This will be a fun conversation, again, because Elena connected us and she's been a guest on this show. She's been a guest on my show multiple times. So I know that we're in for a treat because of that connection. But I think this is going to be a really good conversation as well because we don't have a lot of male voices on this show. And so I'm admittedly quite picky, but you made the cut. And I think, or not I think, I know that you have a lot of value to add for our listeners. So I'm very excited to dig in.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. And, you know, as you mentioned, any referral from Elena Joy is dripped in gold for me. So I'm excited to be here.
Totally. So you have a history of leading extremely diverse teams, and we talk a lot about diversity on the show. In spite of what we're allowed to talk about in other places in the world, we are allowed to talk about DEI here, and we talk about it very proudly. So you have a history of leading extremely diverse teams. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience has been like for you, and how that is a significant part of your work?
Sure. And first off, you know, I think it probably bears some exploration. When I talk about, I'm a pretty pedantic person, which it can be frustrating at times, but when talking about diversity, I go back to the true definition of diversity. And in this country, diversity typically revolves around race or skin color more than anything else. But for me, when I talk about diversity, I truly think about diversity in any aspect that you could think of it or refer as it to. So yes, having been a people manager and a team leader, I've led diverse teams, but I think we all have, just depending on how you describe it. the diversity of the teams that I've led is from my standpoint anyway, has crossed just about any sort of definition of diversity you could possibly have, or any box that you could possibly check. And so some of that was intentional, but probably later in my career, whereas most of it was just intuition and trying to think of, team needs and where holes might be filled or those kinds of things. So it was more along the lines of, how I was raised and things that I was interested in when I was young and coming up. And I played a lot of sports when I was younger. And I primarily found myself in the middle of those sports. So whether it was, point guard on a basketball team or center midfield of a soccer team, I was always in the center of stuff that was going on, though I was never the best athlete or the best player on any of those teams. But my role was always to make sure that the team did the best that it could do based on position alone. And so I just, was kind of conditioned to a certain extent to look for different skills and assets that people brought to that situation, which of course translates into the business world as well when you're a team leader. And so understanding what people bring to the table and how and ways that you can meld that to kind of meet team goals was really something that I was able to leverage as a team lead. And that diversity really helped because we no longer had to rely on kind of the same types of methods or the same approaches or the same perspectives that potentially had been tried previously. But with the diversity of the teams and the diversity of perspectives, we're able to look at different ways and different ideas and different approaches to solving, what were historically kind of the same, whether it's a sales goal or a retention goal or whatever. Those goals historically don't typically change other than the numbers, but how we achieve them tend to change, and how we approach the execution of those strategies change. So for me, taking that experience, I knew it was important to have everybody operating at full power, full engagement, full interest in order to meet our team goals, but then that they also brought different skills and values and perspectives as well. And then that became my job, and my focus was how to get all of that out of them into a way that would help us reach those team goals. So for me, that was some of my most proud work, was being able to pull different details or facets out of folks that maybe they didn't even know, that ultimately would help move the team along. And a lot of times in those situations, those individuals grew within their roles and obtained promotions and those kinds of things that they were interested in, without really knowing that they were coming at it from a different direction or a different viewpoint than typically had been done. So I really enjoyed, it's kind of like, a recipe when you're cooking. I really enjoy putting different pieces together and personalities together to come to a better and higher goal or achievement for the team, using these different perspectives and different personalities and skill sets. So that was probably the single most effective way that I had as a team leader to achieve our team goals.
I love your answer. I love your specificity around the fullness of the scope of diversity. That it is, you make such a great point that we have a very narrow view of what diversity, or we tend to have a narrow view of what diversity means in the U.S. And it is a wide range. It means a wide range of personality traits and attributes and identities and all sorts of different things. And I really appreciate you mentioning how you saw or see your role in seeing people's differences on teams, and then seeing how to leverage those differences to make the whole team, the sum of the team, better than its parts. One of the things I talk about a lot in my work is that, underneath it all, we all have a desire to feel seen, heard, held, and valued. And when you were saying that, what I thought of was, what a gift for the people on the team to have you be able to see something special or unique about each person that makes them different than everyone else, and then pull that from them in order to give them a place of prominence and importance within a team environment where, like, everyone gets their own pedestal of having unique and special value and being able to contribute in a way that's authentic to them and that really highlights their greatest strengths. That's, I would venture to say, most people haven't been on a lot of teams with leaders like that.
Uh-huh.
Can you talk a little bit about your secret to helping each person feel seen, heard, held, and valued, and really recognizing their unique place in a team?
Yeah, and, I have to be honest in that you frame it as, kind of a utopia, and these teams were wonderful environments of
Not so
success and
utopian?
happy. I mean, there was a lot of bumpiness, and if you're working with somebody and this is just another job for them, and they're really not interested in team goals and they just want to get in, punch the clock, and do their work, it's going to be really hard to get them to engage and give their best self. And so there was a number of those folks as well. I think where the work as a leader really became challenging and probably was the heaviest lift was in getting to know these different individuals and different personalities and different skill sets. There's a bunch of employers that spend a lot of time and money on personality tests so that people can understand different personalities and how to interact with a different personality. And all of that is good and valuable, but you also have to be able to connect on a personal level with different types of folks. And so those tests can help in that regard, but they have to be used appropriately and as one of many tools in a toolbox. So the work that I spent a lot of time doing was reaching out and engaging with each person on the team, and that typically meant in different ways for different folks. I remember vividly having a team member who it didn't matter what the situation was or when we had a meeting, whenever I was in the same room with her, she always had to start with, "Hi, how are you? How is your day going?" I like to jump into the stuff, why are we here? What are we meeting on? Let's get through this as quickly as possible so we can get on to the next thing. Until I realized that she couldn't get on with anything else until we had resolved those first three or four questions. And so while it didn't meet my needs to go through all of those initial questions, if I wanted her to be her full and effective and engaged self, that's what she needed. So I had to make sure to fill her bucket and make sure that she had what she needed to then flip the on switch and then get her fully engaged person and help her really kind of kick into high gear. And that was probably the most efficient way for her to do it too. Whereas I looked at it as wasting time because we weren't talking about, the subject matters that we were there to talk about.
Right.
We probably would have spent more time dealing with her lack of attention or engagement or whatever if we hadn't covered those topics at the beginning. So for me, it's really the work really begins in understanding each of the individuals that you work with or that you lead, and then understanding what it is that they need to be successful. I mean, obviously, people need to feel safe, and they need to feel valued, and they need to feel a part of the group or important or however you want to define it. Um, and so you have to figure out how to make sure that they feel like that because it shows up in different ways for different people. So that to me is really the heavy lift. Simple concepts, really, when you talk about them, but in reality, when you're dealing with people and emotions and feelings and perceptions, it's much, much harder to actually achieve. So really coming from creating that environment of safety and of value and inclusion started to unlock, how you could interact with this person, what their personality was, what their goals were, and those kinds of things, because then they could start to open up about what they really thought or they really felt or what they really wanted to do. And so that to me was the foundational piece of getting folks to really work at their highest level that they possibly could.
Such an interesting example that you give. I always think about when I'm working with groups, I think about low exposure to high exposure activities. And so if I'm working with a group for the first time, I'm not going to put them into a really vulnerable situation when they don't know me, they don't trust me, and they, would probably be a little freaked out if I've made them share their deepest, darkest secrets right off the bat. And so I think about in the example that you gave, low exposure is like, we got to come in, check in on our day, like kind of get warmed up and then go into, and now here's like the higher stakes thing where we need to like make progress and set a goal or take action or make a decision. And I think that, when we have familiarity with people, sometimes we want to just go right into the high exposure thing because we're like, let's just get things checked off the list. But those low exposure opportunities are oftentimes where we get into the meat of of relationship building. And that is where that trust and that safety is built and established. And it does take extra time and intention. And for people that don't love relationship building, it's it feels like extra work. But to your point, it's getting you to it's a means to an end that can be extremely valuable. And you're not doing it just because it's a means to an end, because not only are you going to get wherever you need to get that day in a more effective way, most likely, but you also are building a bridge with a person that's going to take that relationship much further in the context of the current relationship, but probably also later too. Like, these are people that you're going to continue to be in contact with, that you're going to be able to ask for favors from down the road, that when layoffs are happening, it's like, I got to call that person and, call in a favor. And so those kinds of steps, taking the time to do the low exposure work, can really pay off down the road.
Yeah. And it's also, the industry that I'm in employee benefits and insurance has been referred to as pale, male, and stale. So it's been done the same way by the same folks for a long time. So as a person of color, especially in a leadership position, I spent my entire career not being seen or being heard. And so I'm ultra sensitive to, dynamics in a group when folks aren't being seen or aren't being heard or need their voices amplified, probably more so than a counterpart who didn't look like me or have to go through the things that I went through to get to this point in my career. And so again, I think that's just something that I was exposed to just through circumstances. And so now I'm ultra sensitive to making sure that the whole group is heard, and that, if somebody has a perspective that is being, muted or even ignored, then, trying to bring that out into the fold and make sure it's considered more effectively, especially if it potentially could help the group reach their goals a little bit quicker than they probably could otherwise.
I love that. And I appreciate you being able to see, here's someone who doesn't fit in the pale, male, stale genre of the industry. And so then what does that mean that person might need because of that? And I think that, with a primarily female audience, whenever it seems like someone's recognizing, like, hey, what you need might be different than what I need, and I want to show up differently than maybe other leaders that you've had in the past have shown up, that goes such a long way. And I think it really helps to expedite building trust, but also it gives people a place to shine and feel confident in taking risks and developing themselves, which I think can be, really invaluable in the long run.
Yeah. I remember I was on LinkedIn. I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn, way more time on LinkedIn than I probably should, or that is probably healthy. But I remember seeing a colleague that I worked at a previous employer, and a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman, and she was championing the fact that she was the regional representative for her diversity, equity, and inclusion team. And this is during the George Floyd, right after the George Floyd murder, and during, the significant upswing of DEI within the country. And I remember, openly mocking the fact that here is this blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman who is, the diversity lead for this organization that was decidedly pale, male, and stale, until, I gave it some more thought and probably had some more conversations with my significant other, who pointed out that that's diversity for them. For that organization, that's diversity. And, kind of stopped me in my tracks, because it's, I was, again, thinking very narrowly of diversity in my own terms in that instance. But for a female to be on some sort of a leadership or an advisement team within that industry, that was different. That was diverse. And so maybe it didn't fit my definition of diversity in that moment, but for them, that was definitely a diverse individual to be included in the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And sadly, there's still a lot of places where that is the bar is just so low.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So one of the things you're known for is amplifying others' voices and being really thoughtful and intentional about amplifying voices that perhaps would not otherwise have opportunities, or have had maybe limited opportunities to be amplified. And I know you have a specific story. When we chatted a while ago, you shared a specific story about taking some extra effort to support a female colleague who was being overlooked. Can you share that story with our listeners?
Yeah, the situation was we were working with a client that had a very narrow perspective, and industry that was very, very homogenous. And I was working on a team with female individuals, all female individuals except for me, who were more knowledgeable, more experienced, had more significant titles than I did, et cetera, et cetera. Except after a couple of meetings, we realized that I was the one who was getting the most quote unquote airtime with the
Mm.
client. And so within our group, we decided that I would be, air quotes here, the leader or the main speaker for our group because I was the one that was being listened to. It didn't matter that my title was the more junior one within the three of us. And so I played the role of leader. And so in that role, and I had done it in other situations at previous employers, I would introduce a topic or a subject and then let one of my female counterparts expand on that, even though it may have been behind the scenes their idea or their approach that they wanted to bring forth. But in order to get it considered and in front of the group, it had to come out of my mouth. So I would start the conversation and then literally sit back and watch the conversation go from there. And at that point, once the door was opened, one of my colleagues could then speak on it or hold court for as long as needed within that topic because they were just adding value at that point. It wasn't them that had really come up with the idea. So, as you mentioned, there's different areas within our society and within businesses for sure that there's a very homogenous workforce or decision-making tree or whatever that sometimes you need to be flexible in terms of how you approach them if you want to get your goals met, if you want to achieve what it is that your team is setting out to do. And for us, it was implementing a strategy that would be most beneficial for the organization. So if these were the roles that we as actors had to play to get to the final scene, then it was most beneficial for the organization.
I think that's a great example. And I think that, I think that we can make assumptions that male leaders are intentionally excluding certain voices, and that can absolutely happen. But then there's also, I think, leaders who really want to amplify voices of people who have typically not had the microphone and amplify people who carry marginalized identities. And there can sometimes be a tentativeness about how to go about that. I've been in situations consulting with organizations where, and this has happened a few times, where an organization will reach out and say like, hey, whoops, we didn't know that we shouldn't have like an all-white male leadership team. And this is teams that have been together since pre-2020 who just like never gave it never thought about it.
Sure.
And then suddenly 2020 and since then have been like, so like we're looking at our website and we're recognizing like, this looks really bad and we want to do things differently, but also is it going to be like weird or awkward or performative, even offensive and insulting to some of our other people in our organization if we're suddenly like, hey, we want we want to share the mic or we want to give other people opportunities. And so it's been really interesting working with leaders and helping them navigate now that I have this realization and I want to do something about it and I want to do it from with the right motivation and in ways that are helpful and not harmful. It's been really interesting to watch people make change in those ways and to change their behaviors in order to support other people, which has been fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that there aren't people who don't want to share the mic, who are very happy with, there's people who are happy with things the way that they are, and they're happy with, the male, pale, and stale setup of things.
Right.
But I do think that there's a large contingency of people who have a lot of power, white males obviously being at the top of that, but white females too, who want to do things differently and are so nervous about doing it wrong or getting too messy that they sometimes feel a little immobilized to do anything at all. So can you talk a little bit about what leaders can do to do a better job in a thoughtful, intentional, and sensitive way when looking to amplify voices of people in their organization or on their teams that carry marginalized identities?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, solving that question, obviously, for companies and for executives is the $1 million question, right? There's a ton of money to be made from consultants who can effectively and efficiently answer that question as we all try and figure out how to navigate that because it can be a bit sticky. For me, if I'm in a conversation with somebody, I would go to the why. Why is your company all male? Why is your company all white if they're all white? those kinds of things, and start to just poke and prod at process and their answers and how they got to this point. And then why do they want to change? Like what is whatever their definition of or goal of diversity is, what is that bringing
Yeah.
for them? Because if they want their website to appear better, it's going to be hard to get away from something that's performative, because they're
Yeah.
they're not they're not looking for tangible results. They're looking for the appearance of results.
Yeah.
I really came passionately to DEI pre George Floyd with, a series of early studies that looked at the concurrence of diversity within businesses and their profitability.
Mhm.
And profitability was, I forget the number now, 3x or 4x or 5x
Yeah.
of
Significant.
non-diverse teams. And in my mind, if I'm a CFO and I'm focused on the financials of a company, I don't need to look at any more pages of that study. Like,
Right.
that's
Right.
it. Now HR figure out how to make this happen, because we want our company to be as profitable as possible. And so I think it really, gets down to the heart of who's driving this discussion or this examination of our organization as to whatever the organization is too much of, and why is it that we want to change. And if it's for appearance's sake, then it's going to be hard not to appear performative. But if it's for tangible results, then you have some meat to really kind of dig into and analyze in terms of, okay, how do we get diversity that's meaningful and impactful, that will help us give enough voices to come up with a newer, different way to build a mousetrap, or a newer, different way to create a strategy or a product or what have you. And what is it, probably institutionally and internally, where we always end up with candidates that look the same. There's now a bunch of companies that create tools that help with job listings or performance reviews that are equity based, so that it doesn't you're not unintentionally ending up with the same result. You can get
Mhm.
to more of a diverse background just by simply how you word or you phrase some of the postings that you put out, attracting candidates and or promoting candidates within, and those kinds of things. So I think, as my dog starts to bark, um,
We love shameless dogs here. It's all good.
she is shameless, that's for sure. So I think really getting into the why is critical in that whole conversation, to understand what it is what's the end goal here? What are we really trying to improve from just a frank and honest discussion? And then you can start to figure out how to go about that and start checking off some boxes on how to achieve those goals.
Yeah, I think, and when you get into that why, you drive it back to mission and values. And when you can
Uh,
connect things to mission and values, it makes decision making so much more clear.
yeah,
And doesn't make it necessarily easy, but it makes it more clear and more simple, so that when you're giving reasoning for things, you're backing it with something. It's not just like, I don't know, just because it seems like we're supposed to do this right
right,
now. So
right,
I think that can go a long way.
yeah.
When we highlight someone's work, or highlight a person who is different than ourselves, how does sharing their light also help us shine brighter?
Yeah, I think for me, that's one of those questions. I have never been involved in kind of individual performer situations, especially when I played sports as a young kid and my body wasn't breaking down. I played team sports. I didn't play individual sports, and so everything was focused around the team, and that's what I really embraced was the team, and I never worried about being the best or the fastest or the most productive. It was really, how do we make it to the championship game, whatever that is, or the highest level that we possibly can. And so I was always focused on the team goals and how each individual performer could contribute in their own way to those team goals. And so when I became a leader in the business segment, that was ultimately the goal as well. The roles that I primarily had, each individual had their own area of business and specialty that they owned and pretty much took care of, and those kinds of things. But there were team retention goals or team sales goals or those kinds of things that they all contributed to, while focusing on their own piece of the pie, so to speak. So my goal as a leader at that point became, how do I help each of these individuals really just kind of blow their individual goals out of the water?
Mhm.
Because as each one reaches and exceeds their goals, the team goals are being reached and exceeded as well. And so Some employees shared my concept of the team. Success of the team was their main mission. Others purely focused on themselves and their own accomplishments and accolades and trumpeted those. The vast majority of folks obviously fell somewhere in the in the middle, but you can leverage that in making sure that you give each of those individuals what they need to succeed. And then also really just being upfront about that. Like, I want to help make you successful because I want our team to be successful. And whether they bought into that team part or not, they understood that I was leveraging their success and their accolades for the greater good, so to speak. So, especially for the folks that were purely focused on themselves, they didn't need to worry about the team. They just were focused on their own individual accomplishments and trying to be as great as they could. But for the rest of the group, they knew that they were a part of the greater good and were interested and engaged in contributing to that and helping the group become, as good as the group could be. So for me, those individuals were a lot simpler to work with. It
Mm.
was those individual performers or those that are most focused on themselves that personally I had to do the most work with because I didn't share that mindset with them, and so I had to
Yeah.
really kind of check my own personal biases and perspectives at the door and really figure out different ways and tools to kind of interact with them to help them reach their goals as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I had an experience where I was coaching in a community that I ran for a number of years, and just the coaching capacity was getting to be more than more than I had the bandwidth for individually. So I thought, okay, I'm going to hire another coach to come in. And I saw someone who I thought had great potential for this role, and I asked her if she wanted to join me. And she didn't have a background in coaching, but she was just kind of a natural. And so we worked together for a while. I brought her in a different role just to help her kind of get familiar with the environment, and then worked her into this coaching role. And she was a Black gay woman who's an introvert. And so we had like all these areas where we were very, very different. And we had so much fun noticing we approached everything from like totally different ends.
Uh-huh.
And so in every interaction that we would try to build out programming together for different things for this group. And I was like, I was thinking this way. And she's like, I was thinking this way. And what I found to be so interesting is how much I learned from someone who was so different, but also someone who was more junior than me in the field, but had things to offer that I never even thought of
Uh-huh.
because she just had such a completely different worldview and was just like a very different personality type. And we, to this day, I mean, this has now been, I don't know, 6 or 7 years later, we still are in close contact. And even though that role no longer exists and I'm not doing that same work, I value that relationship so much and what I learned from that relationship. And we are forever laughing about like, how does an introvert versus an extrovert show up to a meeting? How
Right.
does like this like
Right.
white woman introvert
That's
extrovert
right.
who's like screaming DEI everywhere, and then the Black introvert who's like, yes, I get it.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yep.
just, um,
100%.
there's just all these layers to it, and it was
Uh-huh.
so when I think about how we get to shine when we create space for people who are very, very different from us, there how we all can make up this great team and contribute to great outcomes. And I think there's this unexpected learning that can happen that that is so incredibly valuable, and we get to take that with us everywhere. I mean, now I'm so conscientious when I'm in conversations with introverts where I'm like, wait, are you an introvert? Because you're probably thinking or seeing this really differently than me. And like, let's hash that out before we
Uh-huh.
move forward so that I don't steamroll the whole thing.
Right, right. And it's for me, it starts in that foundation of curiosity,
Yeah.
right? Are you interested in learning more? Are you interested in growing as an individual? Because you very easily could have come to that situation and said, I know what I'm doing. I've done this for a long time.
Yeah.
You're new, you're a junior, you have no idea what you're doing. So just do what I tell you to do. And we see that, right? Like we see
Mhm.
that in all aspects of life and business and sports and movies. And I mean, you name it, we see it everywhere. So for me, it's, does somebody have the curiosity to learn something new or try something different? And I like to say that I do, but the reality is probably somewhere in the middle where there's some things where I'm like, I've tried that. I've stubbed my toe many times, not doing it differently. Even though I may be missing out on a really great outcome because I've lost my curiosity in that one specific area, but specific to business and specific to leadership, I really try to maintain my curiosity and try to understand people's approaches to see if there is something new or different that they could bring to the group that could help the group move farther along. Because, if I come to this thinking that I already have the answers, then I'm likely missing out on a new or different opportunity to grow and develop the team in a direction that could ultimately be more beneficial than any way we've done it before. So for me, that one of those foundational concepts is the curiosity to learn and to grow.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, like you could consider it scarcity mindset, but some of it's like very real, true, and real. When we share the spotlight with other people, we sometimes are risking giving up the spotlight we might need for our own growth and advancement. And I think about this a lot as a woman and disability-owned business. And I'm like, okay, like I want to share as much as I can, and also like I also need to have certain things happen in order to like pay my own bills. And so how can we share the spotlight with other people and amplify voices that are potentially more marginalized than our own, without risking our own growth or advancement? Is that a mindset thing? Is that like, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think for me, I just think it's definitely a mindset piece, and this is one of the areas that I really struggle about because I've never been particularly interested or affected by individual accomplishments. Like it's just never moved my personal needle
Yeah.
internally, to the point of where I get accomplishments or accolades is really really hard for me to accept those or to handle those gracefully because it's just too uncomfortable. I'm much more comfortable in a group accomplishment setting, but I also come to it from the standpoint of, the greater good that we can do, the greater good that's going to come to us. And so I just, whether it's that concept of, putting as much good out into the world so that you can receive as much good back is definitely out there. I think, from a business standpoint, if you're trying to figure out how to, pay the rent and keep the lights on and, feed your family and your pets and
Right.
all that stuff, that's a definite, yeah, aspect of it. But I think that's more of a strategy in terms of who you network with or who you interact with.
Yeah.
But my concept has been to never really count or take note of who I'm helping or why, but just to help as many as I possibly can. I tend to gravitate to those who have similar backgrounds or me or as me or similar experiences because I know how challenging that can be to navigate some of those paths. And if I can provide some shortcuts with my many years of experience, then that's great. But I also feel like somebody like an Elena Joy is going to come along and create some shortcuts for me too, and really kind of help me move forward farther and
Yeah.
faster than I would if I try to navigate things by myself. So, I think it's a mindset, but I also think it's kind of a personality and also an approach to life that sometimes we're just born with, but there's a lot of learned behavior within that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely both and. Well, and I like, the idea of going further together, I think is really true. And um, not to make it sound too glib, but like that's also where the fun tends to be. I think that when we work in when we're so protective of everything and we work in isolation because it has to be mine, we lose out on so much of the joy. Um, and I think that there's some big losses that can come with that. And growth that we don't even know that's out there, like things that we don't know that we need until we have opened ourselves up to sharing a little bit and to seeing how working together can take us further.
For sure. And growth typically comes from not when you're doing really, really well. It's from when you trip and fall on your face.
Yeah.
And if you trip and fall on your face by yourself, then it just hurts and you feel bad and you're embarrassed and you wonder if somebody's Ring camera caught that moment where you
Chances
fell,
are it did these days.
right? But one of some of the most fun conversations and happiest times are when you have those instances in a group or with someone else and you're able to share the levity of the situation because we've all tripped and fallen in some
Yeah.
unnatural spot or uncomfortable situation, and being able to share not only the good times but the bad times really kind of spreads out some of that pain or that embarrassment or what have you. And so doing that stuff in an individual setting, sure, you may minimize or reduce like the accolades or the glory that you might find on an individual basis, but you also are able to spread that pain and suffering across multiple folks as well, as you start to understand like we're really not all that different. We're leading a bunch of similar lives in different areas and ways, and there's ways to share this stuff to make it, hurt less when it's bad, but also you can ultimately achieve higher goals when you share it with somebody else. And so there's both a risk and a reward to that. But I think, for me, the positive is being able to balance a lot of that across multiple folks.
Absolutely. And giving ourselves permission to, I think, experience the joy and satisfaction that comes with accomplishing something with another person.
Uh-huh.
I think that's very different than, I mean, personal accomplishment or individual accomplishment can feel great too, but to be able to do it with someone else or a team of people and to be able to collectively acknowledge and celebrate, like we did that and every person here like did something that, that contributed. There's something just really, really powerful to that. That I did not play team sports growing up like you did, but my son does. And I have so much jealousy because there is that collective winning. Like they all got to do something to be a part of something. And they're just like, in their huddle, jumping up and down after a game. And that I think there's something really meaningful in that in terms of the human experience.
Yeah, and I think you're 100% right. I know you're right. For me, especially in business settings, there's also those groups that are really the highest performing and the most fun groups to be around, where you can truly celebrate somebody's brilliance or excellence without anybody within the group feeling diminished or less than or whatever. And also that person not feeling like it's performative that you're lifting me up, but that you can just truly celebrate the reality of it. Like, hey, Peter today, absolutely hit a grand slam when we needed him to. And what a great time for that, because we all were kind of scuffling around trying to figure out which end was up. And Peter just stepped up and knowing full well that Peter's not going to do that every time. And some other time it'll be somebody else. But the group as a whole, supremely outperformed their expectations or what others thought they could because of this moment of brilliance. But it doesn't mean that Peter is a more valued member, but that we're all just, putting Peter on our shoulders and saying, thank you for doing that today. Tomorrow it could be Sarah, or the other day it could be Theodore or whoever. But those are the groups where they can truly lift up the individuals and their accomplishments in that moment without diminishing others or the group. Those are the most fun groups to be a part of. And those are typically the groups that perform the best as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can't remember if I shared when we spoke a while ago that one of the things that has been really interesting and fun and endearing in the work I've been doing in the last few years is I've had the opportunity to be in a lot of spaces where gone in and facilitated events in corporate spaces where the premise is that this is a women or an event that's mostly for like anyone's welcome, but it's being put on by Women's ERG, or it's, due to the kind of the way the content is marketed, it's mostly going to attract women. And it's usually around like thought leadership and communication confidence and imposter syndrome. And so I'll get rooms full of women with like 3 or 4 guys in the back, which is always great. But initially when this started happening, when I was having some of these conversations, I would watch men come in and they would sit in the back. And in my mind, I was thinking like, I think they're sitting in the back because they want to be able to leave if this is like not their thing.
Sure.
And what started happening over and over again is that they would come up to me afterwards or send me a message on LinkedIn and say, that was so meaningful and I learned so much. And they were really, really grateful and really, really humble. And it was such an important reminder to me that there are many people out there who have who, whether they are male or white female, have a certain amount of power and status in society, who want to do things better and who want to be great allies and who are willing to show up for things and are willing to take risks and who are willing to enter into hard conversations. And so thinking about male allies specifically, what advice do you have for men who are wanting to better showcase the women around them, but they don't want to look creepy or weird. They don't want to look performative. Like they want to be able to really build women up in ways that they maybe don't see happening in their organization and they don't know how to do that or where to start.
Yeah,
or how to model it to others.
yeah, no, and again, $1 million question here because once we have that answer, we have the keys to a lot of different doors. I was talking with my wife who does equity work in a school district, and we were talking about a situation where a good friend of ours that we live in the same neighborhood with, a white male, was asked to help drive some kids to this People of Color conference, Students of Color, and it was
Mm.
just for high school age kids of color to get together and talk about, meaningful topics of the day. And so he happily drove the kids and shows up to the event only to find out he is the only white person in an entire auditorium of people of color. And guy in his 60s. And while he was relatively comfortable, he came to my wife afterwards and said, "Yeah, this is the first time I've been the only. And
Yeah.
this is the first time I've ever been in that situation." And while my wife and I both wanted to scoff at that because that's our everyday existence, it's also like this is a moment for him of him being vulnerable and
Yeah.
really not running or shunning the moment, but really kind of basking in it and trying to really gain as much empathetic perspective as he could to other situations. And I think some of that resonates in regards to, male allies and trying to be non-performative, if you will. But I think you have to really try to get an understanding of what it is to be females in different settings,
Hmm.
if you're identify as a male, and what that might mean to even speak up, right? To even share your opinion or your voice if you're in a room filled with males, because it's rare, especially in this society, that white males are ever onlys in a room where they're asked to contribute. And if they do, typically, as you mentioned, they sit in the back and probably leak out a little bit early before the meeting ends. So I think, bringing that air of genuineness and that curiosity, but also understanding, it can be what it's like for a lot of the individuals in the room with the situation flipped, and how to best and empathetically approach that situation is probably a good first step, because for many of us, like that's an everyday occurrence when you're in a meeting setting and you're one of the few or the only. How and when do you bring up ideas? How and when do you share concepts? If your idea is immediately countered by somebody of, a higher level or executive leadership, how willing is that person to really share ever again, regardless of what the topic of the situation is? Is the meeting set up for everybody to quote unquote share equally, or is there a way to share speaking time equitably so voices are can be heard equitably rather than who shouts the loudest and the
Hmm.
longest? How the meetings are set up can go a long way along
Yeah.
that route as well too. So really trying to be as sensitive and curious and empathetic as possible to, what it might mean to be in someone else's shoes, I think really starts driving some meaningful conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. Can you tell us how you're currently showing up as a shameless leader?
Sure. The organization that I'm currently at in the employee benefits industry is undergoing a huge nationwide task of really revamping culture and environment
Mm.
internally and trying to make it as exemplary or as high performing as they possibly can. And so those that have worked in employee engagement and employee performance know that's a massive, massive task, especially if you're talking about a nationwide kind of initiative. And so, one, it's fun to be a part of an organization that's willing to try and undertake something like that and be genuine about it. But two, it also helps me to bring in not only my previous experience as a leader, but then also a lot of the equity work that I've done in my past as well, to make sure that we get to highlight and we get to listen to voices that maybe haven't spoken up before, maybe haven't had their voices heard even though they were speaking up, and making sure that we equitably appreciate all of the different perspectives and values that folks can bring to solving the challenge of making the organization, a better environment to work with, a healthier environment, a safer environment, all of those things that really drive success and performance on an individual level, and ultimately, in this case, drive the group or the company's performance as well. So I get to use a bunch of the lessons, the painful lessons that I learned across my career in a number of different areas to help drive some of these initiatives. And so that's been a lot of fun from my standpoint, because my role isn't typically within the organization, isn't typically thought of as a quote unquote leadership role. But with this initiative, we all get to be leaders in how we kind of push that organizational initiative forward. And that's been a lot of fun for me.
I love that. I love the through line of you having, an experience years ago where you became committed to amplifying someone's voice, and then going into all these different work environments and contexts and situations, and continuing to check in with yourself in terms of what is needed in this group, and how would this group benefit from diversity of perspective, diversity of, all the other layers of diversity. And I feel like in this work, once it's a part of who you are, and once it's a part of your value system, there's no separating it out from like any aspect of your life. And so you notice everywhere, like, why is it in this situation that's maybe not work related at all? Why is it in this situation that only these voices are being heard, or that only these people are being showcased? And so I appreciate how this theme keeps showing up for you, or you keep putting yourself in positions to, leverage this superpower of yours to showcase diversity and center it for the good of a team or organization or outcome. This has been so much fun, Themba, and I could ask you 27 more questions, but our time is coming to an end. Can you tell people where they can listen, or tell listeners where they can find you, connect with you, and follow up with you after this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me. I'm on that social site nearly every day, checking messages and keeping updates within the business world throughout that format. So they can go to my LinkedIn page and direct message me through that if they want, and I'm happy to connect with them on anything, whether it's employee benefits, insurance related questions, or social questions, or just general questions. I'm happy to answer whatever and engage with folks in however is valuable for them. But I think, for me, the fun part is really understanding different ways and avenues that folks apply some of these concepts, as you mentioned, to different aspects of our life. It's not just personal, or it's not just business, or it's not just, raising kids or whatever. A lot of this stuff just applies in so many different ways, and people apply them in so many different ways that many of us haven't even thought of. So I like hearing about a lot of that stuff as well, too. So happy to connect with anybody.
Perfect. I love it. So we will go ahead and link your LinkedIn in our show notes. So people go to sarahdean.com, go to the podcast tab, and then you can look for the episode with Themba Dayton, and Themba is Themba, Dayton, Dayton. And we will link up that LinkedIn page there. And Themba, thank you so much for being here. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, and really grateful that our listeners get to hear this. And I'm hoping that our listeners will share this episode with male leaders in their sphere to be like, hey, like, here's how we can collectively do better.
No doubt. Well, thank you for having me. I'm humbled and I'm honored to be a part of your show and your podcast. I think this is super exciting. You're doing great work. And, any way that I can help or engage with you or your listeners, I'm happy to do. So thank you again.
Thank you, Themba. Thank you for allowing me to spend time in your ear today. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe to this channel. To learn more about my speaking, training, and coaching services, visit sarahdean.com. That's SARADEAN. I would also love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn at sarahdean.com/LinkedIn, or on Instagram at sarahdeanspeaks. I love hearing from my listeners. Thank you for showing up for yourself today. I see you, I hear you, and I'm holding space for you today and every single day.